Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. In the first segment of today's show, we're going to discuss the migrant crisis, which has once again escalated, specifically when it comes to Greece. As we know, there are political tensions right now happening between Turkey and Europe over that 2016 agreement about how Turkey would stop, or try to stop at least, the flow of refugees and asylum seekers into Europe. There is now that situation playing out in Idlib in Syria. And therefore, Turkey has said it is opening its borders into Europe because Europe has not done its part when it comes to that 2016 deal. Now, I don't want to concentrate specifically on that aspect of Syria necessarily, but also want to talk about specifically Europe's responsibilities at this point, because it seems more money, 700 million euros, if I'm not mistaken, is going now into preventing asylum seekers from entering into Greece, as the European official von der Leyen has said that Greece is the shield for Europe at this point in time and needs to be protected from having these asylum seekers enter through it. What does that mean for Europe's own moral responsibilities at this time towards these people who are fleeing persecution of all sorts from around the world? Let's discuss that further. We're now joined by Marianna, who is a journalist and doctoral researcher at the University of Birmingham. She's joining us now from Birmingham itself. Joining us from Innsbruck in Austria is Klaus Jurgens, who is a political analyst and journalist. Klaus and Marianna, thank you for your time today. Marianna, let me start with you. What do you make of how Greece has been reacting at this point in time?
Greece has reacted with a lot of violence on what is going on currently. And it's not actually surprising, considering the new government that we have, which since its election, it has been following a rather right-wing policy when it comes to the refugee crisis. However, it was quite surprising that they announced military drill when at the border areas when there were 15,000 people waiting to cross. And as it has been proven today by forensic architecture, one person was shot dead on that area, and we don't really know if it's from the Greek authorities or from paramilitaries that work with the Greek authorities at the moment on the area.
You know, Klaus, there's just this conversation in Europe right now, right, which is just essentially just fear of what would happen if all of these asylum seekers would come in seemingly, and Europe needs to protect its borders, etc. And all of the above, of course, is true within the context of national security, but these people are fleeing persecution. What about Europe's moral responsibilities here?
I fully agree. Now, as it so happens, I know the Turkish side of the Aegean coast extremely well, and the border region. Now, the one thing I do understand is if, for example, you take a small island like Chios or Samos or Lesbos, the absorption capacity is reached very quickly. Now, this does not mean that the people there should turn violent. I am blaming both the EU and the government in Athens not having done so much more, so much faster, that this situation would not even have happened. Now, I'm just counting numbers. We are having just over 4 million people in need now hosted by Turkey. It seems the EU would not even want to take the burden of 1% of these men, women, and children. No one says that everyone would need to stay on an island or in Greece. It is still a European Union of 27. And only on Tuesday, the British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, on a tour in the region, paid a visit to Turkey as well. Now, the United Kingdom is in the mix too. I think Greece is overreacting. When I listened to the speech of the esteemed Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, immediately offering 700 million euros, half of it straight away, half of it can be asked for a little bit later. Then I said, oh my dear, is Europe really afraid of doing something in the humanitarian sector? This is my first observation, if I may. Yes.
Right. So then, Marianna, tell us, what are your thoughts about the root cause of all of this? Right. As I'd mentioned, Syria is an important aspect in all of this, although many of the people, in fact, showing up at Europe's borders are not actually just Syrians. They're from all over the world, really. But if we just look at that for a moment, and if that's really to be blamed in this case, what does it say about Europe not actually doing more to try to resolve such political situations that are happening in the Middle East, where these people then need to flee from?
Well, actually, the majority of people who arrive at the islands at the moment are not from Syria, but they are from Afghanistan, which is also another war zone. So generally, the people who arrive in Greece come from the war zone. So their asylum application should be considered very, very carefully on an individual case. I don't think that Europe in general is willing to help and do anything. I don't think they are willing to be involved in Syria generally. And we have seen this from the beginning. That's why the burden on resolving the Syrian crisis is not on Europe at the moment. They are quite clear that they do not want to be involved. But they also do not want to be involved in resolving the refugee crisis, as we call it, which in my opinion is not a refugee crisis, it's a solidarity crisis from the European side. And it was quite clear in 2016 when they agreed with Turkey on the EU-Turkey statement, which is a non-legally binding agreement, that Turkey will take responsibility of preventing the arrivals. This is not how a humanitarian crisis is resolved. And we should not be putting so much emphasis and so much trust on a country that has clearly proven that is not a reliable country. And also, it's not a safe country for refugees.
Would it not be easier, Marianna, for Europe to deal with this issue head on instead of trying to ignore it?
It could be easier, but Europe is not willing to deal with the issue. And it has been very, very clear, I think. The only thing that, in my opinion, Europe cares at the moment is preventing people from coming on its borders. And this is purely for voting reasons. Because Europe has the capacity to host the people. If Lebanon and Turkey have the capacity, then the European Union does have the capacity. It doesn't have the willingness to do it because it will upset the voters, especially when the majority of the political parties that are in power in the European Union at the moment come from the right wing sector of the political spectrum.
All right, so then, Klaus, let's talk about national security of the bloc itself, right? Or just security, I should say, pardon me, of the bloc itself, because there is a legitimate concern there as well, right? Because we don't know, and nobody ever knows when, especially asylum seekers are showing up at their door, the background of all of these people necessarily. So if you allow every single person in without asking questions or without proper checks, etc., that all makes for a very confusing situation, which could possibly put your own people at risk. So how does a country then go about, or how does a bloc go about doing that in a proper fashion, and again, a more humane fashion than what is currently happening?
Well, one solution would be, and there is an organization called European Stability Initiative, which is indeed not making public relations, of course, but as it so happens, it is a group of experts very active in the field of visa liberalization for many countries, not only Turkey, and the migrant flow in general. Now, only a few days ago, there was a discussion floated of the same debate we had before, not only in 2016. If we let a high number of people into our territory, and many of them undocumented, what can be done from a national and European security perspective? Well, there will be possibilities to check someone's background. Now, the question is, can a handheld mobile phone be used where private data are stored, or would this be an infringement of privacy? This is one way of doing it, but there are cases where you simply have to say, for the benefit of the doubt, we have to start the asylum process. Now, this takes a long time. And if the EU makes it clear to every future would-be arrival that there is no automatic right, no guaranteed right to stay, and that you actually might be sent back, including to Turkey, which was considered a country of safe origin, I think the numbers as such would not skyrocket, because everyone knows they might just be on a return trip. I fully understand national security is an issue. You have to weigh the humanitarian responsibility at the same time. Think about Turkey, over 4 million individuals. Now, please don't tell me that everyone could have been 100% checked the night after arrival. Turkey took a great risk, and ultimately it worked out well up until the absorption capacity. But Europe hasn't reached its absorption capacity. But I'm pretty much sure national security is an issue, but there will be ways of starting the asylum and registration process. And if not, it must be made clear that there is the risk of potentially being returned. Being returned to where? Being returned to Afghanistan for the time being returned to the northern part of Syria for the time being, of course not. So again, it all boils down to a good relationship with Turkey. You know, Turkey would take, again, the highest number of those returnees. And now, if I still have half a minute, now the EU has promised Turkey so much visa liberalization, 6 billion, only 3 billion have been paid so far. Now, Turkey comes to a certain absorption capacity problem. And I think the EU and Turkey must sit down urgently and at once to see if someone is sent back to Turkey, how many legal, in inverted commas, migrants can be taken from Turkey onto the EU. And the numbers do not match. The numbers simply do not match what the EU promised Turkey.
Okay, so Marianna, what are your thoughts about the issue of security? It's a very real issue, isn't it? I mean, I know that there is a lot of rhetoric when it comes to this, and a lot of that rhetoric is very overstated about the danger of these people showing up in Europe, etc. And I know that a lot of the people like Viktor Orban and others possibly ride on that. But I mean, at some level, though, at some percentage, there is a legitimate concern, isn't there? Because if you don't know the background of everyone who is showing up at your door, that means that you may very well be opening yourself up to some danger?
Of course, the issue of security is a legitimate issue. However, when someone crosses from Turkey, they are being checked. There are background checks by European authorities as well as by Greek authorities and secret services. So if there is someone of high risk, I'm pretty sure that the authorities can detect them. However, we are not talking about a security issue here. We're talking about a humanitarian issue because the majority of the people are refugees. And what we have been saying by the European Union and Greece now is their willingness to turn the humanitarian side of the issue into a security issue. They securitize and militarize the refugee crisis in order to, in my opinion, to gain votes and to satisfy the right-wing voters, at least in Greece.
Okay, so Klaus, I want to look at the picture here for a moment, if we can, because it's interesting, isn't it? In the year 2019, from what I was reading in a report, that European arms manufacturers sold a lot more weapons than, for example, in just the year 2018. And we can talk about a lot of the countries that those weapons are sold to, even in the Middle East region and beyond. I don't want to get into those specific countries, but I want to look at the macro issue that, sure, if Europe is selling all these arms around the world and then has a problem when there are wars because of those arms playing out, and then people are searching for safety and security at Europe's doorstep, is that not just hypocrisy?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I fully agree. Again, now this debate is going on for years, and in Europe, and of course the UK is still part of Europe, at least, even if not of the EU, technically speaking. The debate goes on for a long time. Shall we continue to allow arms sales in the knowledge of that they actually might be used against humanity, might be used in wars? Of course, that's why the weapons are made. Or shall we not only sell arms to countries or to allies which are actually protecting our values at the same time? It is the NATO membership debate. Now, this is, of course, hypocrisy. Look, a politician who says we need the arms and defense industry, it guarantees so many jobs and employment, right, point taken. But then the politicians must actually decide to whom should these arms be sold. Europe has a lot of homework to do in this regard, and I'm not very happy about that situation at all, because once you are selling arms into a region, be certain at one point they are actually going to be used. Yes, very, very good point. Thanks that you mentioned that. Yeah. It is a crucial issue for our political system how to deal with that. And should there be an embargo? Why not? arms sales could be stopped at any time. We should never forget, it is the elected politicians being in charge who could actually curtail the flow of weapons. Indispensable of saying, yes, jobs are at stake, but then a politician might do foresight analysis and say, if we can stop and prevent further escalation of humanitarian suffering, would that not be a very wise policy move? But it is a crucial issue, and it's unfortunately not going in any direction I would like, with all modesty. Yes.
Indeed. Marianna, what are your thoughts on that? Because for me, it's just cause and effect, right, the way I see it. I mean, I wonder what your thoughts are on that, because it seems that you can't be selling weapons freely around the world, making a lot of money, as many of these countries would argue, and their politicians would argue that these are vital industries and they make a lot of money for their respective nations. And then at the same time have a problem when wars occur because of those weapons in some way. And then there's this humanitarian crisis, and then you refuse to then help the people who come out because of that crisis. I mean, this is all just very hypocritical, isn't it?
It is very hypocritical, and the European Union in general is a very hypocritical union. I do agree that there should be an embargo of selling weapons, but I don't think this will happen because we live in a capitalist world. It will never happen, because as long as Europe can make money out of wars, it will continue making money out of wars, and it will not be involved in any wars because they do not want to see a similar disaster as in Iraq or Afghanistan in 2003 and 2001, or even in Libya, because when France was involved in Libya, look what happened. I'm pretty sure they do not want to get involved in Syria for similar reasons, as well as Russia and China that are involved in Syria.
All right, so then when we're talking then, Klaus, about Europeans going forward and how they're going to be continuing to react when it comes to this situation of migrants, do you think that we're just going to see tougher and tougher tactics at this point in time, sending these people back into danger, into their respective nations that they're fleeing from? What then will the rest of the international community, how do you think the rest of the international community will react, or do you think it will not? Because Europe is such a large and influential bloc, even in international organizations?
Well, a member of the German Foreign Affairs Parliamentary Committee, Norbert Röttgen, actually someone who wants to run for the CDU chairmanship himself, he said that what happens now is a wake-up call for Europe, and that actually Turkey needs help. He didn't interpret that people were being able to travel to the border as a threat by Turkey, but as a kind of, he said in German, a cry of help. Now, this was a very encouraging comment. Now, Angela Merkel said, I think only some hours ago, that she would consider a no-fly zone to guarantee or to re-establish peace. Now, the EU has only one worry, that 2016 would repeat itself. And the most complicated point of all is, imagine you would have only a number, 30,000 new arrivals, and half of them would need to be returned to the country of origin. How would this ever work when you knowingly send someone back to a country where they might be tortured, where their life is at risk, their family's life is at risk, where an entire region is under duress and stress and life is unsafe? Would you really want to send them back? Of course not. And this is the dilemma I think many European politicians behind closed doors really are afraid of. What to do then? And would they then simply say, let's send them all back to Turkey? Now, what would Turkey do? Okay, we take 15,000 back and we give you 15,000 documented migrants. This was the original deal, 1 for 1. But the EU has not even shown any sign to go into that direction. So honestly, the foreign and security policy, as posh as it sounds, of the European Union is in complete tatters at the moment. I think flying down to Greece and then just offering a handout, a huge handout, let's be honest, is of course one way of saying, okay, the crisis will end and nothing will happen, no one will cross the border at all, and then back to business. But they forget the root cause of it all. If there is a civil war or a serious, in inverted comma, war in one part of the world and people have to flee. If you want to do a foreign and security policy, you must approach this root cause and try to stop the human suffering there, because then people would not simply have to leave. There is no sign of getting on with that issue, unfortunately.
Marianna, I wonder what your thoughts are. And, it's easy to say that, sure, it's these right-wing politicians in Europe, and we can probably name a lot of them, right? The Salvinis, the Orbans, or even the current Greek administration. But at the end of the day, it's the Europeans who have voted in these respective politicians. So do you think that in some ways that, this is misinformation on the part of media and or government that is convincing Europeans to become ever more right-wing and almost, if I may use the word, hateful towards migrants or asylum seekers? Or is it just genuine, that these are just genuine feelings of many Europeans?
I would say both. I can speak about the Greek media, and it's full of fake news and misinformation. And they do follow a certain governmental agenda because they are supported by the government. But this is a very problematic side of the Greek media. But at the same time, there's genuine concern by the people, by the locals, especially those who are in areas where these hotspots, as we call them, are. For example, in the Greek islands, as well as on the mainland. They feel that they have been ignored by the government. They feel that they feel genuine fear because they do not know what to expect, because the only information that they get is from the Greek media and the Greek television, which is highly problematic and full on propaganda, I would say.
All right, we'll leave there as a final word, but of course, we should both Marianna and Klaus for their time today and, of course, sharing their thoughts with us on this pretty disturbing topic, isn't it? Because Europe essentially, really, even according to Amnesty International and other human rights groups around the world, is essentially going against international law in many ways, because people have a right to find safety and to go out and search for safety, and countries have to, according to international law, take them in, at least process them and figure out, okay, do these people actually deserve asylum or otherwise? And it's not like anyone is saying Greece itself needs to take this on itself. I mean, that's Europe's choice, where European countries as a whole haven't been able to unite to distribute these people across Europe and take and shoulder the responsibility together. Now, it's easy to say that this is Turkey's problem or Syria's problem or otherwise, but as I put to our guests as well, it is Europe itself which is selling the most arms around the world, or is one of the very large blocs which sells arms around the world, which then encourage these various sorts of wars at some level. So you can't both be making money off this sort of situation, and at the same time, when the humanitarian crisis that occurs because of those wars, wash your hands clean of it and say, we don't want anything to do with it. Europe does have a responsibility in this regard, both morally and by international law standards as well. I'll be back with my next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment of today's show, we're going to discuss how the CIA ran an 11-year-long hacking campaign against China. That's according to a Chinese antivirus firm, which I believe is pronounced Chiho. It says it discovered this spying campaign by comparing samples of malicious software it discovered against a trove of CIA digital spy tools. This was all released by WikiLeaks, as you'll remember, in 2017. What does all of this mean at this point in time? Because for a very long time now, for a number of years at the very least, there's been this discussion of ethics, right, within cybersecurity, within hacking, within spying, at this time, at least cyber spying on different countries. And it always seems that the fingers are pointed at specific countries around the world. But what of the U.S. actions itself? And we can go all the way back to Snowden and otherwise, as to how the U.S. really reacts and acts when it comes to such issues itself. Let's discuss that a bit further. We're joined now by Gina Yannitell at Reinhardt, who is an associate professor and reader and political analyst. She's with the Department of Government at the University of Essex. She's a professor of disaster relief and resilience, foreign aid and development, and political trust. She's joining us now from Essex on the line. Gina, thank you for your time today. What do you make of this revelation by this Chinese antivirus firm? Does it make the U.S. seem a bit hypocritical at this time?
Absolutely. It makes the U.S. look hypocritical, but that is not new. actually. The U.S. has always, at least since World War II, tried to push certain agendas in other countries and at the same time tried to make some of those other countries behave differently from the way the U.S. is behaving. I don't think it should surprise anybody to find out that the U.S. has been engaging in cyber hacking or espionage, especially with respect to China.
And if we're talking about the details here for a moment, this report says that possibly a lot of aviation industry details were what the CIA was after, possibly. That's at least one of the theories here, and that's what the documents reveal. When we're then comparing this to how the U.S. has been treating the likes of Huawei, for example, if I may just pick on an example, do you think that this will all then change as how the world then views that issue as well?
I think it will change the worldview, yes. I don't think it will change the U.S. stance. In other words, right now, with President Donald Trump, there's a very hawkish and isolationist doctrine going on in terms of foreign policy. And spying, espionage, and other techniques like that are not going to go away just because the rest of the world thinks that the U.S. is being hypocritical. And it definitely is being hypocritical. I think it will change the conversation in the rest of the world about what is acceptable and what is considered necessary. But for many years, the U.S. has considered itself above discussions like this and sort of likes to be a big brother or a peacekeeper in the world, which means that it will also, people in decision making will make choices that reflect that, and they believe that the U.S. should be able to implement some of these tools.
So then, do you think it's an issue that the American people possibly do not know enough about such stories, that there isn't enough pressure building on the U.S. establishment to change these sorts of practices? Because, I mean, if the rest of us around the world know about this and, are turned off by this sort of action and this sort of hypocrisy, then why aren't the American people putting more pressure on the U.S. establishment to change this?
Well, the American people are actually really don't think too much about the rest of the world. And people who believe that espionage is okay or believe that the government right now is doing the right thing are going to say that that's the price that the world has to pay for relative peace, which is what they believe that the U.S. is supporting around the world. Some people will say that they don't even believe the stories are true because they've attach themselves to the idea that news is fake or blows things out of proportion. Some people are going to point to the fact that even if it's true that the U.S. has a lot of espionage and illicitly obtained information about the Chinese aviation industry, what has gone wrong? It's not as though the U.S. is using it to bring down Chinese planes or anything like that. And so they will call a rule that we say no blood, no foul. If no harm has actually been done, then they don't want to hear about it.
But then,
and some people
go ahead.
Some people are definitely not going to be happy about it. Their voices right now are most clearly being expressed through the presidential election that's taking place. And if people are really unhappy about this, they will vote out the current administration. But this is an issue that comes in a long list of issues that people are contending with right now.
Indeed. And, what's interesting about this sort of the cyber issue that we're discussing right now is that this is not necessarily just to do with national security issues, right? Because as I had put to you earlier as well, it's aviation industry, which was spied upon in China, as well as internet firms, scientific institutions, and energy companies. So it seems that this is also to do with almost business, right? Where you're trying to get a leg up on another country or a huge power in the world, economic power such as China. Does this then mean we're entering an even more dangerous era than when it comes to cyber spying on each other and cyber warfare almost? Because you would imagine that anybody who's at the receiving end of this sort of spying would say, okay, it's a free-for-all now, so we'll do in kind as well?
Absolutely. But I think that it's naive to think that people, these people who may say we'll do it in kind are not already doing it in kind, because it's likely that many of them are. I think that our appreciation of how much cyber espionage is going on is very, very low compared to what is actually happening.
And then what does that then mean for you and I, do you think, Gina? Because, obviously privacy online has been a huge issue for many years, and we pretty much know that whatever we post online and say online and do online is pretty much known by XYZ, and Big Brother is always watching, right? Whoever Big Brother may be. But then does this have further implications even for us and our security online, do you think?
I think that it does. It doesn't have to be a government. There are many people who are interested in cyber hacking and espionage, phishing, catfishing, malware, the list goes on, right? And so it is a constant sort of tete-a-tete between people who are looking to do damage and people who are looking to make things more secure. And as we move forward, if you want things to be more secure, I think that we will see a sort of retrenchment in terms of what we do online. I think that people have already started withdrawing a little bit from what they post on social media. For a few years now, people who are worried about the lives of their children being endangered don't post pictures of children and things like that. I think that that is going to become more common in the next 5 to 10 years, that people will be less liberal with the information they're willing to share online and more careful. But I don't think that we're looking at any sort of drastic disaster, a cyber disaster coming up.
All right, so then as a final thought then, Gina, do you think international bodies need to really get involved at this point? Because, I'm envisioning a world where if there was a bad actor who wanted to act out in some fashion to hurt any country who would be an adversary, we're talking about power grids. We can talk about a whole host of things, right? Nuclear power plants around the world. There's a whole host of dangers that could possibly erupt through the misuse of cybersecurity or hacking. Do you think that international bodies, be it the UN or others, really need to get involved urgently, really, before anything like that does happen?
Without a doubt, we are way behind on making laws about this, and the U.S. is far behind as well. Technology sped ahead starting about 20 years ago in a way that most legal systems had no way of accommodating. The idea of cyber crimes, cyber taxes, cyber monitoring, all of that was completely new to any legal system. And every country is far behind in actually regulating and having legal systems about it. And the international system is even farther behind. So it is well past time for the international community to strike up and develop some agreements and accords and resolutions about these things that at the very least would make it easier for the general public to discern who's in the right and who's in the wrong.
Very well, Gina. We'll leave it there at that. But of course, we appreciate you taking your time out to speak to us today here in Scope. That was Gina speaking to us from Essex. Now, this report that has been released by this Chinese antivirus firm goes back to a report that WikiLeaks had released back in 2017, as I put in my introduction. But it does show a lot of hypocrisy on the part of the U.S., doesn't it? Because the U.S. is always pointing the finger at China, for example, or Huawei and the 5G network, saying China will use that to steal intellectual information from other countries, etc. But at the very same time, CIA, a U.S. agency, was essentially already doing the same when it came to China for the past 11 years, if we're to believe this report as it's been presented by this antivirus firm, be it aviation details, scientific details, and otherwise, even energy companies' details. Why does the United States need that sort of information if the argument is that all of this is being done for national security? It's not really national security, is it? It is, as the U.S. has accused others, to get a leg up when it comes to business or trade or otherwise. So the U.S. is really essentially playing in kind, or has been playing in kind for the past 11 years. So why is it then it gets to point the fingers and have or claim moral authority over everybody else? It doesn't have moral authority and needs to stop believing that it does, and the rest of us need to stop believing it does as well. I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks very much for watching.